We have natural numbers, whole numbers, integers, rational numbers, and rational numbers are basically numbers that can be written in the form of something over something. So think of it this way. If you can write a number as a fraction, it's a rational number. And that includes things like 2 over 1. The 2 over 1 is the same thing as 2, but you're writing it out as, as a fraction. If you can write it as a fraction, it's a rational number. Negative 5 over 1 is a rational number because you can write it as a fraction. 1 over 2 is a rational number because it's a fraction. Anything that you can write as a fraction, if it has an end, it's a rational number. Think of rational like it makes sense, right? Rational, it makes sense. Okay, so that's rational numbers. Number 5, we have irrational numbers. Irrational numbers, it's not that they don't make sense, it's that they're kind of weird. They're weird because they don't end. They go on forever. Like pi. Pi is an irrational number. So when you think of pi, which is 3.14, and then it goes on. Did you know, pi doesn't repeat. It just goes on and on and on. That's part of the gist with pi, is that it's irrational. It doesn't have a pattern, and it just goes on forever. The square root of any prime number is also irrational. So like the square root of 2 is irrational. And we're going to talk about what prime numbers are here in a second. Very good. Number 6. Let's actually, we're going to do even, odd, and prime. But first, let's do imaginary. Imaginary numbers. Imaginary numbers are numbers that are not in the real number category. So everything from number 1 to 5 on the board is called a real number. Everything from number 1 to 5 is called a real number. Number 6 is called an imaginary number. It's a complex number. And imaginary numbers are things like square root of -4, which is the same thing as 2 times I. 2 times I. That's called an imaginary number. So an imaginary number is a number like the square root of -4. That's called imaginary number. Now, the crazy thing is that when you take a smartphone and you try to understand why it works, it's because of imaginary numbers using a principle called complex analysis. So whenever you have a device, an iPad, a phone, some of these devices, they are running off mathematical explanations, okay? So that's number 6, imaginary numbers. Number 7 is even numbers. Number 8 is odd numbers. So these are the different types of numbers. Even and odd numbers are pretty straightforward. Think of 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So even numbers end with 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. And so those are even numbers. Those are the examples of even numbers, okay? So examples of even numbers would be like anything 2, 4, 6, 8. Anything that can be divided by 2 pretty much. While odd numbers can't be divided by 2 evenly, right? And so you're familiar with odd numbers. Those would be like 1, 3, 5, 7. So as we begin our journey from counting to calculus, it makes sense to know what the numbers even are. What are the different types of numbers, right? That's the chapter 2 of our book here, Understanding Mathematics from Counting to Calculus. We're trying to understand the different types of numbers, and then we're going to talk about place value, right? We're going to talk about different names for how to classify the different numbers in a number chain, right? So on page 8 of your book, it says naming digits. We need to be able to name the digits. And so we have the ones place, the tens place, the thousands place, and so on and so forth. So that's place value. So after you understand what numbers are, the next thing then is to understand how they work in the place value. We're also going to talk a little bit about decimals, but decimals, they're kind of they're in this category of rational numbers, a lot of rational numbers, but they also have some that are irrational. So decimals can be either, depending on what the decimal is. Pi, for example, can be written as a decimal, but it just goes on. Some people have memorized pi to 10,000 digits. 10,000 digits of pi. I can't believe it, but some people have done it. It shows the mind that the God has blessed us with. It has the capacity to go up to 10,000 places. People can memorize digits up to 10,000 places. Okay, there are some symbols in math that we should talk about, but before that, I'm going to clean the board. We're going to talk about prime numbers, and once we talk about prime numbers, I'm going to give you a fun exercise to help you find prime numbers, And then we're going to talk about the less than, greater than, infinity symbols, all the different symbols that are used in mathematics. But let's go ahead and we're going to, the next category of numbers is so special. And also I don't have any room on the board. So I'm going to clean the board and then we're going to look at prime numbers. Let's do that next.